Hey everyone, this is JHC bringing you another GD02 deck build. Today we have red-white Justice blockers, and this will actually be the main deck I'll be testing out in locals going forward. Uh, to get into it, starting with your level 2s, we're running 4 copies of Nemo. You can use the Jin if you want, just any 2-1 unit here, just 4 copies of it to kind of help establish something on board if you're against an aggro matchup. Then we have 3 copies of the Gundam Lefrith. This card is still good in my opinion, just the fact that it survives wing, but that's kind of about it that it does at this point, and it kind of survives a lot of ping, but the main drawback here is with the 2 AP. So instead, I'll be running 4 copies of the new Rick Diaz, the 3-2 blocker with a 3-3 stat line. I've talked about this in other white deck profiles I've done. It's just I think having that extra AP and be able to trade a little easier just makes this card a lot better than the Gundam Lefrith. Then we're going to run 2 copies of the Strike Roge. The fact that we're running a lot of blockers here and just being able to pay 1 compared to the Archangel of paying 2 to restand a blocker, I think is just can kind of help us in the late game if we need to swing and then also protect. Then we're running 2 copies of the Aegis Gundam from the starter deck. This card is really only good in green-white matchups, especially against wing. If that's what your local sees, then you'll kind of want to keep this at 2 copies because being able to link this with Atherin or Kira or even the Hawk of Endymion that you'll see to get that 5 AP to trigger the if this unit has 5 or more AP, choose one enemy unit that is level 5 or higher, deal 3 damage to it. So essentially, you could potentially get a 2-for-1 here if you swing at shields or base and then just ping 3 to something else. I think it's really strong. But if you're a local scene or if you anticipate wherever you're taking this deck to see more aggro, you might want to trim this down to 1 copy to make sure you kind of don't see it. Because against aggro, everything's pretty much level 4, and you don't get any use of trying to get this unit up to AP level 5. And then we're running the 3 copies of the Aegis Gundam, the Breach 3 version, the MA mode. This is pretty good. The main drawback, I think, with this unit is if you link it with Atherin, it becomes a 4-6, so it'll survive a lot of attacks, potentially 2 to 3. But then again, like in the late game stages, it's kind of hard to get rid of some of those units with only 4 AP. Then we only have 1 copy of the new Buster Gundam that's being added with GD02. I think it's a really positive sign, first off, that the link requirement we're seeing here is coordinator trait. This kind of helps you build around the Zaft and the Earth Alliance kind of package of just being able to either link this with Atherin or Kira. The main drawback, I think, with this card right now is you kind of need to link it with something to make sure it gets blocker. And I don't know if I want to waste 2 cards just to get 1 extra blocker when this deck pretty much runs just generic blockers in general. Then we have 2 copies of the Launcher Strike Gundam. This is just a more expensive, slightly better Lefrith with it having a 3-4 stat line compared to the 2-4. You could also link this with a Hawk of Endymion if you're feeling pressure and you need to link this with take care of a something else that your opponent has on board, whether it be a Grandpa Gundam or a Char Zaku or a Kshatriya, something like that. Then we have 3 copies of the Sword Strike Gundam. I live and die by this card. I feel like at this point it's just being able to potentially get the 2-for-1s in the aggro matchup, especially when you link this with Kira and you're able to AP minus a 2 AP unit you're battling and then bounce another to hand. I think it's just really strong. Same thing with the Ale Strike Gundam. We're running 3 copies of this. Just being able to bounce something back to hand, whether it be you're in a kind of mirror matchup against another blocker deck and they're thicking out the Lefrith or the Rick Diaz or something like that, and you need to go for game in that turn. If you have this with a pilot in hand, you're able to just pair this and just bounce that back. Then we have 2 copies of the Freedom Gundam. The Freedom Gundam, I think I'm still kind of on the fence about. I think the effect is really strong, especially when you link it with Akira, potentially AP minusing something by 4. I think it's really strong. But besides that, if you're just using this as a generic blocker, again, I think you run into that AP stat line being 4, sometimes being hard to trade with. Then we have 2 copies of the Justice Gundam. My main use for this card late in the game is just being able to play 2 cards for essentially 1. And if I have the Atherin and I need to put some pressure, getting 2 swings in on the turn that is played, I think it's great value for the cost and the level compared to some of the other cards. Then for pilots, so we're just running 4 Atherin Zala, 4 Kiras, 4 Archangel. I might switch this card out. I think for now, with what I'm hoping to do with the deck, I'm able to frequently restand blockers. But the Strike Rouge basically does the same thing for one less resource, which I think is way better than this. Because I feel like, in theory, and this is what I want to run, and this is how I want to play the deck. But in testing and even in other decks where I run the Archangel, I never end up using 2 resources to restand a blocker because I'm just mostly playing from behind on a blocker deck and need to just drop more bodies compared to just restanding the ones I already have on board. Then we have 1 copy of Hawk of Endymion. This is pretty much just to make sure that we can get that Sword Strike Gundam some more consistency to be able to link on curve, because that's really the main unit we want to play on 4 resources. Then 4 Overflowing Affection again. If you're running white or blue or some of the command cards in green, I feel like any deck you run, you need some sort of draw power, some way to cycle through your deck and make sure you're able to see the cards you need to see at the right time. And then finally, I'm running 2 copies of the All Range Attack. I think that this card will see some pretty good use at the beginning of the meta, just based on the fact that you can deal 1 damage to all units other than link units. I think the problem is GD02 kind of establishes a lot of vanilla and generic link traits and units that, if those end up seeing play again, like I talked about in my other videos, like this card will pretty much only ping 1 card, and at that point you're paying you're paying 2 resources to ping 1 card when there already are other red commands that it's a 1 cost to ping 1. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, this is just the red white justice blockers that I'll be running at locals at the start of GD02 and kind of seeing how it goes from there. And obviously, I think everyone can understand that the deck you ran at the beginning of GD01 at the inception of the game is very different to what you run now. So I'm excited to see where this deck goes and to kind of test it against more my local scene, which sometimes I see meta decks or off meta decks, to kind of see where that goes. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping the video a like, and if you enjoy content like this of deck building and theory crafting, some unique builds and just other ways to kind of think about it, I feel like having someone else's opinion is always valuable because they might see things that I'm missing. Please also consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, guys.